The cold wind whipped against Caleb Hawkins' face, stinging his weather-beaten skin as he urged his horse up the treacherous mountain path. 3 days of riding had left him bone-weary, but the bounty on Jared Wiley's head would make it all worthwhile if the outlaw was truly hiding in these Montana mountains like the rumors claimed. It was 1875, and the West was still wild despite the slow creep of civilization. Fort Benton, the nearest town, was a good 40 miles behind him now. Caleb had left its bustling riverfront and adobe-walled trading posts that morning, climbing steadily into the foothills of the Rockies as the day wore on. Now, with the late October sun sinking behind the peaks, he needed shelter for the night. His stallion, Thunder, snorted anxiously, hooves slipping on loose shale. Caleb patted the animal's neck, his gloved hand gentle despite his growing concern. "Easy, boy. We'll find somewhere to rest soon." As if in answer, a thin wisp of smoke curled above the trees about half a mile ahead. Caleb narrowed his eyes, one hand instinctively moving to rest on his Colt revolver. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant people, perhaps his quarry, perhaps not. He dismounted, leading Thunder by the reins as they approached more cautiously. The trees grew dense here, providing cover as Caleb moved forward. When he reached the edge of a small clearing, he paused, stunned by what he saw. A cabin stood nestled against the mountainside, its logs weathered gray by countless seasons. A garden plot, now mostly harvested, stretched to one side. What truly caught his attention, however, was the woman working outside. She moved with quiet efficiency, hanging animal skins to dry on a rack near the cabin. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid that reached the middle of her back, and she wore buckskin clothing that had clearly seen years of use. A rifle leaned against the wall within arm's reach. Caleb watched her for several minutes, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A lone woman, living this far from civilization? It seemed impossible. Yet the evidence stood before him. This woman was not just surviving but thriving in one of the harshest environments imaginable. His horse shifted restlessly, snapping a twig underfoot. The sound carried in the mountain air. The woman whirled around, rifle in hand, and aimed directly at his hiding place before he could blink. "Come out where I can see you," she called, her voice strong and clear. "Slowly, or I put a bullet through those trees." Caleb had stared down the barrels of enough guns to know when someone meant business. Holding his hands up, he stepped into the clearing. "Name's Caleb Hawkins, madam. I mean no harm. I'm tracking an outlaw, and the trail led me up this way." Her eyes, a startling blue against her sun-darkened skin, assessed him coldly. She didn't lower the rifle. "No outlaws here, just me. And I don't welcome uninvited guests." "I can see that." Caleb kept his voice even. "Night's falling, and the weather's turning. I'd be grateful for shelter until morning. I can pay." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in those blue eyes, perhaps curiosity or simple pragmatism. After what felt like an eternity, she lowered the rifle slightly. "You can sleep in the lean-to with your horse. At first light, you ride on." "I appreciate it, Mississippi." Sophia Larson." She turned away, clearly considering the conversation over. "There's a stream behind the cabin for your horse. Don't wander." Caleb led Thunder toward the lean-to, wondering what series of events had led this woman to such an isolated existence. As the night closed in and the temperature dropped further, he made a small fire outside the lean-to, careful to keep it controlled as the wind picked up. From inside the cabin, he could see the warm glow of a lantern. Sophia Larson moved about inside, her silhouette occasionally visible through the single window. The mystery of her presence here nagged at him, but Caleb knew better than to press his luck with questions. Not yet, anyway. The howl of a wolf echoed through the mountains, followed by another. Thunder nickered nervously, and Caleb stroked the horse's muzzle. Closer than I'd like, he murmured, reaching for his rifle. The cabin door opened, and Sophia stood framed in the doorway, her own rifle cradled in her arms. "Wolf-pack's been getting bold lately," she said. "Your fire won't keep them back if they're hungry enough." Caleb nodded. "I've dealt with wolves before." She seemed to consider something, looking at the darkening sky and the swirling snow that had begun to fall. "Bring your horse to the corral behind the cabin. There's a proper shelter there. You can take the floor inside. I won't have a death on my conscience." Her tone made it clear this wasn't kindness but practicality. Still, Caleb was grateful. He gathered his saddlebags and led Thunder to the small corral she had indicated. The inside of the cabin was sparse but comfortable, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Furs and hand-woven blankets added warmth, and dried herbs hung from the rafters. Everything spoke of self-sufficiency and careful preservation. "You've made quite a home here," Caleb remarked, setting his gear down near the door. Sophia stirred something in a pot hanging over the fire. "It serves its purpose. How long have you been up here alone?" Her back stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Long enough to know I prefer it that way." She ladled stew into a wooden bowl and held it out to him. "Eat, then sleep. I rise before dawn." The stew was surprisingly good, rich with game meat and wild vegetables. Caleb ate in silence, respecting her clear desire for minimal conversation. When he finished, he spread his bedroll near the door, as far from her sleeping area as the small cabin allowed. "Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Larson." She didn't respond, already busy with mending what looked like a trap of some kind. Caleb settled onto his bedroll, listening to the howling wind outside and wondering what story lay behind the solitary woman who had reluctantly offered him shelter. Morning came with a shock of cold air and the smell of coffee. Caleb opened his eyes to find Sophia already dressed and moving about the cabin. Outside, heavy snow blanketed the ground, still falling steadily from a leaden sky. "Your tracking will have to wait," she said without preamble. "Storms set in. Could be days before it passes." Caleb rose, folding his bedroll efficiently. "I've imposed enough already. I can make my way back to Fort Benton." She gave him a look that questioned his intelligence. 3 feet of snow out there already, with more coming. Even if you could find the trail, which you can't, your horse would founder in the drifts. Unless you're keen on becoming wolf food, you're staying put. Her blunt assessment was accurate, Caleb knew. He'd seen enough winter storms in his years as a bounty hunter to recognize when nature had the upper hand. "Then I'll earn my keep," he offered. "I'm handy with tools, good at hunting. Whatever needs doing." Sophia paused, studying him with those penetrating blue eyes. "Firewood," she finally said. "We'll need more than I've stockpiled if this storm lasts." They spent the morning in the lean-to attached to the cabin, where logs were stacked for seasoning. Caleb split wood while Sophia sorted dried herbs and meat from her stores. They worked in companionable silence, broken only by the occasional necessary word or the howling of the wind. By midday, with the wood supply substantially increased, Caleb ventured a question. "Most folks live in town or at least in the valley. What brought you up to these mountains alone?" Sophia's hands stilled momentarily. "Freedom," she answered simply, then resumed her work. Caleb waited, but it became clear no further explanation was forthcoming. He returned to splitting logs, respecting her reticence even as his curiosity grew. That evening, as they shared another meal of venison stew, Sophia surprised him by asking a question of her own. "You said you're tracking someone. A bounty?" Caleb nodded. "Jared Wiley. Robbed a bank in Helena, killed 2 people during the escape. Word is he headed into these mountains." "Wiley." She frowned slightly. "Heard that name before. Red-haired man with a scar along his jaw." Caleb set down his spoon, suddenly alert. You've seen him? About 2 weeks back. He tried to steal one of my horses. Changed his mind when he found himself looking down my rifle barrel. Her mouth curved in a small, humorless smile. Last I saw, he was heading northwest, toward the high passes. That's valuable information, Caleb said. Thank you. She shrugged. I don't care about your bounty. But men like that bring trouble, and I've had my fill of trouble. There was a story there, Caleb knew, but he didn't press. Instead, he said, once this storm clears, I'll move on and track him down. The passes will be snowed in now, Sophia said matter-of-factly. He'll either have made it through before the storm, in which case he's long gone, or he's holed up somewhere waiting it out. She stirred the fire with a stick. Either way, you won't be tracking anyone until spring thaw. The realization hit Caleb hard. Months of waiting meant Wiley could be in Canada or California before he could resume the hunt. There must be some way through, he insisted. Sophia's eyes reflected the firelight as she looked at him. There are ways for those who know these mountains. But not in a storm like this, and not without knowledge of the secret paths. You know them, Caleb stated. It wasn't a question. I do. She set her bowl aside. But that doesn't mean I'm sharing them with a stranger. I could make it worth your while, he offered. The bounty on Wiley is substantial. She laughed then, a sound so unexpected it momentarily stunned him. What would I do with money up here? I need nothing from your world, Mr. Hawkins. Caleb, he corrected automatically. And everyone needs something, Miss Larson. Her amusement faded. Sophia, she returned, meeting his gaze directly. And you're wrong. What I need, I provide for myself. The storm raged for 3 days, during which Caleb and Sophia settled into an uneasy coexistence. She allowed him to help with chores around the cabin but maintained her reserve, offering little about herself despite his careful attempts at conversation. On the morning of the 4th day, Caleb woke to silence. The howling wind had finally stopped. Through the cabin's small window, sunlight sparkled off pristine snow that transformed the landscape into something from a dream. Storm's broken, Sophia announced, already dressed in multiple layers. We need to check the snares and see if any game's moving. Caleb dressed quickly, grateful for the chance to get outside after days of confinement. The cold hit him like a physical blow when they stepped out, but the breathtaking beauty of the snow-covered mountains made it worthwhile. Sophia moved through the deep snow with practiced ease, showing Caleb how to follow in her footsteps to conserve energy. She led him to a series of cunningly placed traps and snares, most empty, but 2 containing rabbits that had sought shelter in the wrong places. Not much, but it's a start, she said, efficiently cleaning the animals on the spot. Winter hunting is about patience and knowing where to look. As they worked their way along a ridge, Sophia suddenly dropped to a crouch, signaling Caleb to do the same. She pointed silently toward a small clearing below, where a magnificent elk pawed at the snow, searching for food beneath. We eat well tonight, she whispered, raising her rifle with practiced precision. The shot echoed through the mountains, and the elk dropped immediately. Sophia was already moving, and Caleb followed, impressed by her marksmanship. Clean shot, he commented as they reached the animal. Can't afford to waste ammunition on wounded animals that might get away, she replied. Help me dress it. We need to be quick before the scavengers come. Together they worked to clean and quarter the elk, a task made more difficult by the cold, but one that Sophia clearly knew well. Caleb followed her instructions, learning the specific techniques she used to maximize the meat and hide. You're good at this, she remarked as they finished loading the meat onto a small travois she had brought along. Most city men would be squeamish. I'm no city man, Caleb replied. Grew up on a ranch in Texas before I took to bounty hunting. No stranger to butchering. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. As they pulled the travois back toward the cabin, Caleb realized this was the first time she had offered anything approaching a compliment. That night, after they'd hung most of the meat in a small smokehouse behind the cabin and prepared some for immediate eating, Sophia seemed more relaxed than before. The successful hunt and the breaking of the storm had brightened her mood. "How did you learn all this?" Caleb asked as they sat by the fire. "Living off the land, surviving alone in the mountains, it's not something most people know how to do." Sophia was quiet for so long that Caleb thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "My father was a trapper. After my mother died when I was 12, he took me with him on his expeditions. By 16, I could track, hunt, and survive as well as any man." A shadow crossed her face. "Then came the war. He joined the Union Army, never came back. I kept on as he'd taught me." "I'm sorry about your father," Caleb said. She acknowledged his sympathy with a slight nod. "What about you? How does a Texas ranch boy become a bounty hunter?" Caleb hadn't expected the question to be turned back on him. "War changed things for me too. Came home to find our ranch burned, family scattered. Drifted for a while, then discovered I had a knack for tracking men who didn't want to be found." He shrugged. "Pays good when you succeed, and I like the freedom of answering to no one." "Freedom," Sophia repeated. The same word she'd used to describe her own choice of life. Their eyes met briefly across the fire, a moment of unexpected understanding passing between them. The next morning, after checking that the elk meat was curing properly, Sophia surprised Caleb with an announcement. "I'm going to show you some basic winter survival skills. If you're determined to track your outlaw through these mountains, you'll need them." Caleb tried to hide his surprise. "Does that mean you're considering helping me find Wiley?" "It means I'm considering keeping you alive," she corrected. "Whether I guide you or not hasn't been decided." For the next several days, Sophia became Caleb's teacher. She showed him how to recognize edible plants even beneath the snow, how to build emergency shelters, how to move across deep snow without exhausting himself, and how to read the subtle signs of weather changes that could mean life or death in the mountains. Caleb proved an apt pupil, his existing outdoor skills providing a foundation that Sophia built upon with her specialized knowledge. He found himself increasingly impressed by her competence and intelligence, while she seemed gradually more willing to acknowledge his capabilities. "You catch on quick," she admitted one evening after he had successfully constructed a snow cave under her critical eye. "Most men would have given up by now." "I'm not most men," Caleb replied with a slight smile. "And you're a good teacher, even if you don't suffer fools gladly." The hint of a smile touched her lips. "Life up here doesn't allow for fools. The mountains don't forgive mistakes." As they worked together day after day, Caleb began to notice small changes in Sophia. She spoke more freely, occasionally even shared stories from her years in the mountains. The wariness in her eyes when she looked at him was gradually replaced by something closer to respect, perhaps even trust. For his part, Caleb found his thoughts drifting to Sophia at odd moments, the way sunlight caught in her dark hair, the rare sound of her laughter when something genuinely amused her, the graceful economy of her movements as she went about her tasks. The bounty that had brought him to these mountains seemed increasingly less important than the remarkable woman who had made them her home. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of checking traplines, Sophia asked a question that caught Caleb off guard. "What will you do after you catch Wiley? After the bounty's collected?" Caleb considered the question. It was one he rarely asked himself, living as he did from one job to the next. "There's always another wanted poster, another trail to follow," he said finally. "Been that way for years now." "Sounds lonely?" Sophia observed, her eyes on the dancing flames. Says the woman who lives alone on a mountain, Caleb countered gently. She looked up at him then, her expression unguarded for once. I chose this life. Sometimes I wonder if you chose yours, or if it chose you. The question struck uncomfortably close to home. Caleb had never thought of himself as a man without choices, but looking back, each step of his path had seemed inevitable rather than selected. Maybe a bit of both, he admitted. After the war, tracking seemed like something I could do, something that made sense when not much else did. He paused. What about you? Ever think about leaving the mountain, going back to civilization? This is my civilization, she said simply. Down there is just noise and constraints. She hesitated, then added more quietly, and grief. It was the first real hint she'd given about why she had retreated so completely from the world. Caleb wanted to ask more but sensed her withdrawal as soon as the words left her mouth. Instead, he said, I've never stayed in one place long enough to call it home. Always been moving, looking ahead to the next horizon. And has that made you happy? She asked. The directness of the question took him aback. Happy? I don't know. Free, maybe. Independent. There's a difference between independence and isolation, Sophia said, her voice thoughtful. Took me years to understand that. Before Caleb could respond, a long, eerie howl cut through the night, followed by another closer to the cabin. Sophia was on her feet in an instant, reaching for her rifle. Wolf pack, she said tersely. Close to the corral. Caleb grabbed his own rifle and they moved to the cabin door. Outside, the nearly full moon illuminated the snow-covered clearing, bright enough to see the dark shapes moving at the edge of the trees. 4, maybe 5 of them, Caleb murmured, counting the shadowy forms. 6, Sophia corrected. See there, by the large pine? This is a big pack and they're desperate. Winter's been hard. The wolves moved closer to the corral where Thunder and Sophia's 2 horses stamped nervously. One bold wolf, larger than the others, trotted forward, testing the boundaries. That one's the leader, Sophia said. Take him, and the others might scatter. Caleb raised his rifle, sighting carefully in the moonlight. His shot cracked through the still air, and the lead wolf dropped. The rest of the pack hesitated, then retreated into the trees, their howls fading into the distance. Good shot, Sophia acknowledged, but they'll be back. Hunger makes them persistent. They spent the night taking turns on watch, but the wolves didn't return. By morning, the only evidence of the encounter was the carcass of the wolf Caleb had shot, now partially covered by a light snowfall. Sophia studied the tracks around the dead wolf as they ventured out to check on the horses. They've moved on for now, but this pack knows there's food here. We should move the meat from the smokehouse into the root cellar under the cabin. They spent the morning relocating the elk meat, working together with the easy coordination they had developed over the past weeks. As they finished, Sophia paused, looking toward the northwestern peaks. The high pass should be navigable now, she said. If you still want to track Wiley, we could try tomorrow. Caleb looked at her in surprise. You won't find him without me, she said matter-of-factly. And I've decided I don't want him circling back this way when spring comes. I won't turn down your help, Caleb said carefully. But I need to know you understand the risks. Wiley's dangerous. Killed without hesitation before. Sophia's expression hardened. I can handle dangerous men, Caleb. I've had practice. There was something in her tone that made Caleb wonder again about her past, but he knew better than to press. Instead, he nodded. We'll leave at first light then. They spent the rest of the day checking weapons, packing provisions, ensuring the cabin and animals would be secure during their absence. As they worked, Caleb found himself watching Sophia, struck by the change in her since his arrival. The woman who had greeted him with a rifle and cold suspicion now moved beside him with a quiet confidence in their partnership. That evening, as they sat by the fire making final preparations, Sophia spoke of the route they would take, a narrow pass unknown to most travelers, a path her father had shown her years ago. It cuts 3 days off the journey to the next valley, she explained. If Wiley knew about it and used it before the heavy snow, he could be holed up in an old mining settlement there. And if he's not, she shrugged, then we return, no worse off than before. But my instincts say he's there. I've learned to trust your instincts, Caleb said with a smile. Sophia looked up, meeting his gaze directly. I've learned to trust you, she replied softly. That's not something that happens often for me. The simple statement affected Caleb more deeply than he expected. In the flickering firelight, Sophia's face seemed softer, the habitual wariness in her expression replaced by something more vulnerable. I'm honored by that trust, he said, his voice equally quiet. And I give you mine in return. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Then Sophia rose, breaking the spell. We should sleep. Tomorrow will be demanding. Morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. They set out at dawn, Sophia leading on her sturdy mountain horse, Caleb following on Thunder. The trail she chose was barely visible, winding through stands of pine and along steep ridgelines. By midday, they had climbed high enough that the view stretched for miles, the world below transformed into a vast landscape of white peaks and dark valleys. Sophia pointed toward a distant notch between two mountains. The pass lies there. We'll reach it by nightfall if we keep a good pace. They pushed on, the horses laboring through snow that sometimes reached their chests. Sophia led them through natural breaks in the drifts, following a path that seemed invisible to Caleb's eyes until she pointed out the subtle markers, a certain configuration of rocks, a bent tree, signs that would be meaningless to anyone not initiated into the mountain's secrets. As the sun began to sink, casting long blue shadows across the snow, they reached a protected hollow just below the pass. A natural overhang created shelter from the wind, and dry wood stacked against the rock wall indicated Sophia had used this spot before. We'll camp here, she announced. Crossing the pass in darkness would be foolish. They made a small fire, just enough to warm their food and provide some comfort against the deepening cold. The horses, blanketed and secured in a sheltered spot, huddled together for warmth. How often do you make this journey? Caleb asked as they ate their simple meal of jerky and hard biscuits. Once or twice a year, Sophia replied. There's a trading post in the next valley. I barter furs for supplies I can't make or grow. Ever thought about staying down there? Life would be easier. She shook her head. Tried it once after my father died. Found I couldn't breathe among so many people, so many expectations. She poked at the fire with a stick. Up here, the rules are simple: live or die by your own abilities. Down there, it's different. Different how? Caleb pressed gently. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her face shadowed. People want things from you. They judge, they demand, they take. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. I was married briefly. He seemed kind at first, but once we were wed, he changed. Caleb felt a cold that had nothing to do with the winter air. He hurt you. It wasn't a question, but Sophia nodded. In every way a man can hurt a woman. Her voice was flat, emotionless. One night, when he was in a drunken rage, I defended myself, left him bleeding on the floor of our cabin and fled into the mountains. Later heard he'd died of his wounds. She spoke matter-of-factly, but Caleb could see the old pain behind her calm recitation. You did what you had to do, he said quietly. The law might not have seen it that way, she replied. So I kept running, higher and deeper into the mountains, until I found a place where no one would look for me. Her mouth curved in a small, sad smile. Found my freedom in isolation. I'm sorry for what you endured, Caleb said, resisting the urge to reach for her hand. No one should suffer that way. Sophia met his eyes. We all carry our scars, Caleb. I suspect you have your own. He nodded slowly. The war left its mark. Saw things, did things that haunt me still. He hadn't spoken of this to anyone in years. Maybe that's why I took to bounty hunting, chasing other people's demons instead of facing my own. They sat in silence for a while, the confession hanging in the air between them. Finally, Sophia spoke again, her voice gentler than Caleb had ever heard it. Thank you for not pitying me, or judging. Not my place to judge anyone, Caleb replied, least of all someone who survived what you did. Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening of understanding, perhaps, or the recognition of kindred spirits. When they finally settled down to sleep, wrapped in their blankets on opposite sides of the dying fire, Caleb found himself more aware than ever of Sophia's presence, her strength, and the trust she had placed in him by sharing her story. Dawn arrived with a sky the color of steel, clouds building over the western peaks. Sophia studied them with concern as they packed up their camp. Weather's changing, she observed. We need to cross the pass quickly. They set out immediately, climbing the last steep stretch to the narrow pass Sophia had indicated the day before. From below, it had appeared as merely a notch between mountains, but as they approached, Caleb could see it was actually a narrow, winding trail cut into the mountainside, barely wide enough for a single horse. Let the horses pick their way, Sophia instructed as they reached the entrance to the pass. They'll find the safest footing if you don't rush them. The passage was harrowing, a sheer drop on one side, the mountain wall on the other, and the path sometimes no wider than 3 feet. The wind whistled through the narrow space, occasionally gusting strong enough to make the horses sidestep nervously. Halfway through, snow began to fall, light at first but quickly increasing in intensity. Sophia glanced back at Caleb, concern evident in her expression. We need to hurry, she called over the rising wind. Storm's coming faster than I expected. They urged the horses to a faster pace, risking the narrowest sections with less caution than was wise. The pass seemed endless, winding back and forth along the mountain face, sometimes dropping sharply only to climb again. Finally, after what felt like hours, the path widened slightly, and Caleb could see they were descending into a new valley. The snow was falling heavily now, reducing visibility and making the footing treacherous. There's an old trapper's cabin about 2 miles down, Sophia shouted against the wind. We can shelter there until the storm passes. They pushed on through deepening snow, following a route that only Sophia could discern. Caleb trusted her completely now, focusing only on keeping Thunder moving forward through the increasingly difficult conditions. Just as the light was beginning to fade, a dark shape emerged from the swirling white the cabin Sophia had promised. It was smaller than her own, little more than a single room with a crude lean-to for the horses, but in that moment it looked like salvation. They hurried the horses into the lean-to, unsaddling them quickly and providing what comfort they could with their blankets. Inside the cabin, dust and disuse greeted them, but the stone fireplace was intact, and a stack of wood remained from the last visitor. Caleb quickly built a fire while Sophia secured the door and windows against the howling storm. Soon, the small space began to warm, and they shed their snow-covered outer layers. Will the horses be all right? Caleb asked, concern for Thunder evident in his voice. The lean-to is sheltered from the worst of the wind, Sophia assured him. They'll be cold but fine. We may be here for a day or two, though, until this blows over. The cabin had a single narrow cot, a small table, and little else. Sophia began unpacking their provisions, arranging them carefully on the table. We'll need to ration, she said. Just in case. Caleb nodded, then set about sweeping years of dust from the floor and cot. As night fell completely, the storm intensified, snow driving horizontally past the single window, the wind finding every crack and crevice in the old cabin walls. They ate sparingly, huddled near the fire for warmth. The cabin was drafty, the cold seeping in despite their efforts to block it. Take the cot, Caleb offered when it came time to sleep. I'll be fine on the floor near the fire. Sophia shook her head. The floor's too cold. We'll share the cot for warmth only, she added quickly. It's practical, nothing more. Caleb recognized the logic but couldn't help feeling a certain tension at the prospect. If you're sure. They arranged themselves awkwardly on the narrow cot, both fully clothed except for their boots, lying back to back with their shared blankets pulled tight around them. Despite the innocent nature of the arrangement, Caleb was acutely aware of Sophia's presence, the warmth of her body against his back, the sound of her breathing. "Good night, Caleb," she said softly. "Good night, Sophia," he replied, certain that sleep would elude him. Yet exhaustion eventually won out, and he drifted off to the sound of the wind and Sophia's steady breathing beside him. He woke sometime in the night to find they had both turned in their sleep. Sophia was now curled against his chest, her face peaceful in repose. Caleb remained perfectly still, not wanting to disturb her rest or breach the trust she had placed in him. But as he watched her sleep, something tightened in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in many years, perhaps had never truly felt before. Carefully, he adjusted the blankets to better cover her shoulders, then closed his eyes, savoring the simple comfort of human closeness in the midst of the storm. Morning brought no relief from the blizzard. If anything, the storm had intensified overnight. Sophia woke first, quickly putting distance between them as she rose to check the fire. "Worse than I expected," she commented, looking out the window at the white void beyond. "We won't be going anywhere today." They settled into a routine, taking turns tending the fire and checking on the horses. The close quarters forced a new level of intimacy, not physical, but the intimacy that comes from having nowhere to retreat, no way to maintain the usual barriers between people. They talked more openly than before, sharing stories from their pasts. Caleb told her about his childhood in Texas, about his brief time at university before the war interrupted, about the family he had lost touch with over the years of wandering. Sophia spoke of her mother, who had taught her to read and write and appreciate beauty even in harsh surroundings. Of her father, who had been gentle at home but fierce in the wilderness. Of her dreams as a young girl, before life had taken unexpected turns. "I wanted to be a teacher once," she admitted. "Had a way with numbers that my mother said was unusual." "You still could be," Caleb suggested. "It's not too late." She gave him a wry smile. "Some doors close permanently, Caleb. I've made my peace with that." As the day wore on and the storm showed no signs of abating, they inventoried their supplies more carefully. They had enough food for perhaps 3 days if they were frugal, but if the storm lasted longer than that, they would be in trouble. "I could try hunting once the wind dies down," Caleb offered. "Nothing will be moving in this," Sophia replied, shaking her head. "And visibility is too poor to track even if it were. We wait." That night, they shared the cot again, the awkwardness of the previous evening somewhat diminished. This time, when Caleb woke in the darkness to find Sophia nestled against him, he allowed his arm to rest lightly around her waist, protective rather than possessive. He was surprised when she spoke, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. "I haven't been this close to anyone in years," she murmured. "I'd forgotten what it felt like. Is it all right?" Caleb asked softly. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she finally answered. "With you, it's all right." The simple statement filled Caleb with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or blankets. He tightened his arm slightly, drawing her closer, and felt her relax against him. "Sleep well, Sophia," he whispered. They stayed that way until morning, finding comfort in each other's presence, as the storm raged around their fragile shelter. The second day of confinement passed much like the first, though the storm began to show signs of weakening by evening. They rationed their food carefully, played simple games with a deck of cards Caleb had in his pack, and continued the conversations that seemed to flow more easily with each passing hour. "What would you do if you weren't a bounty hunter?" Sophia asked as they sat by the fire that night. Caleb considered the question. "Never gave it much thought," he admitted. "Maybe go back to Texas, try ranching again. Or head west to California, see what opportunities might be there." "Alone?" The question seemed to surprise even Sophia herself. Caleb looked at her thoughtfully. "Doesn't have to be alone, I suppose. Right person might make settling worthwhile." Their eyes met across the small space, and something unspoken passed between them. Sophia was the first to look away, but not before Caleb saw confusion and perhaps longing in her expression. "The storm's breaking," she said, changing the subject as she glanced toward the window. "We should be able to move on tomorrow." True to her prediction, dawn revealed a transformed world brilliantly white under a clear blue sky, the storm having moved on during the night. They prepared to depart, saddling the horses and packing their few belongings. "The mining settlement is about 4 hours from here," Sophia explained as they set out. "If Wiley's there, he'll likely be in the old assayer's office. It's the sturdiest building still standing." They rode through a pristine landscape, the fresh snow unmarked except for occasional tracks of wildlife that had ventured out after the storm. Despite the cold, the day was beautiful, sunlight creating diamonds across the snow-covered valley. By early afternoon, they approached the abandoned mining settlement Sophia had described. What had once been a bustling community was now a ghost town. Half-collapsed buildings partially buried in snow, rusting equipment scattered about, all evidence of a boom that had gone bust decades before. They approached cautiously, leaving the horses concealed behind a stand of trees and proceeding on foot. Caleb had his rifle ready, and Sophia carried hers with equal preparedness. "There," she whispered, pointing to a stone building near what had once been the center of town. "The assayer's office. See the smoke from the chimney?" Caleb nodded, noting the thin wisp rising against the blue sky. Someone was indeed sheltering there. "Could be a trapper or prospector," he said quietly. "Let's make sure before we act." They circled the building carefully, staying out of sight. Through a partially curtained window, Caleb caught a glimpse of a red-haired man moving inside. "It's him," he confirmed in a low voice. "Wiley." Sophia nodded. "How do you want to handle this?" Caleb considered their options. "He's dangerous cornered. Best approach is direct. I'll go to the front, you cover the back in case he runs." "Be careful," Sophia said, touching his arm briefly. "He has nothing to lose." They separated, Sophia moving silently around to the rear of the building while Caleb approached the front, rifle ready. At the door, he paused, listening to movement inside, then pounded firmly on the weathered wood. "Jared Wiley, this is Caleb Hawkins. I have a warrant for your arrest. Come out with your hands visible." Silence followed his announcement, then a crash from inside as something heavy was overturned. A shot splintered through the door, missing Caleb by inches as he dove to the side. More shots followed, Wiley firing wildly through the walls and windows. Caleb kept low, waiting for a pause in the shooting. When it came, he called out again. "You're surrounded, Wiley. There's no way out." A voice shouted back, ragged with desperation. "I ain't hanging, Hawkins. You want me, you'll have to kill me." Another shot cracked through the air, but this time from the back of the building. Sophia's voice carried clearly. Next one goes through you, not above you, Wiley. Drop your weapon. A tense silence followed, then the sound of a gun clattering to the floor inside. Don't shoot, Wiley called, his bravado gone. I'm coming out. The door opened slowly, and Jared Wiley emerged, hands raised. He was thinner than his wanted poster depicted, his once handsome face now gaunt and wind-burned, his red hair wild and unkempt. Caleb moved forward quickly, keeping his rifle trained on Wiley as he checked him for additional weapons. Finding a knife in his boot, he removed it, then bound the outlaw's hands securely. Sophia appeared around the corner of the building, her rifle still aimed steadily at Wiley. Good work, Caleb said to her, genuine admiration in his voice. She nodded, not lowering her weapon until Wiley was fully secured and seated on a bench outside the building. Didn't expect a woman, Wiley muttered, glaring at Sophia. Should have shot you when I had the chance back at your cabin. Yes, you should have, she agreed coolly. Would have saved us all some trouble. They searched the assayer's office, finding evidence that Wiley had been holed up there for at least a week, provisions stolen from somewhere, a makeshift bed, and most importantly, a saddlebag containing most of the money from the Helena bank robbery. This will help your case, Caleb told Wiley, securing the money. Returning what you stole might make the judge more lenient. Ain't no judge going to be lenient for 2 dead men, Wiley spat. Save your breath, bounty hunter. With Wiley securely bound, they faced the question of what to do next. Night was approaching, and traveling with a prisoner through mountain terrain in darkness would be dangerous. We'll stay here tonight, Sophia decided, looking around the stone building. It's secure enough, and we can leave at first light. They made camp in the assayer's office, keeping Wiley tied and under constant watch. He was sullen but not actively resistant, perhaps recognizing the futility of his situation. As night fell, they took turns standing guard. During his watch, Caleb found himself thinking not about the bounty he would soon collect, but about what would come after. For the first time in years, the prospect of moving on to the next job, the next town, the next temporary lodging, felt hollow rather than freeing. He watched Sophia sleeping near the fire, her face peaceful in repose, and realized with sudden clarity that he had found something in these mountains far more valuable than any bounty. When morning came, they prepared to leave, loading their prisoner onto his own horse, which they had found in a lean-to behind the assayer's office. With Wiley's hands bound and a lead rope attached to his horse, they set out for Fort Benton, a journey Sophia estimated would take 3 days. The trip was arduous, made more difficult by Wiley's presence. He alternated between sullen silence and attempts to sow discord, particularly targeting Sophia with crude remarks about her solitary lifestyle. Caleb marveled at her composure in the face of Wiley's provocations. She simply ignored him, focusing instead on guiding them through the safest routes back toward civilization. On the evening of the second day, as they made camp in a sheltered ravine, Caleb found a moment to speak with Sophia away from their prisoner. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "After I deliver Wiley to the authorities in Fort Benton, I don't have to move on right away." Sophia looked at him, her expression guarded. "What are you saying, Caleb?" "I'm saying I could stay. Help you through the rest of winter, maybe longer." He met her eyes directly. "If you wanted that." She was quiet for a long moment, her face unreadable in the gathering dusk. "Why would you want to stay in one place, especially somewhere so isolated?" "Because in all my wandering, I've never found anywhere that felt right," Caleb said simply, "or anyone who made me want to stop wandering. Until now." Sophia looked away, but not before Caleb saw the conflict in her expression. "You don't know what you're asking," she said softly. "I've lived alone for years. I'm not sure I remember how to be any other way." "We could figure it out together," Caleb suggested. No rush, no pressure. Just a chance. When she looked back at him, her eyes held a vulnerability he had rarely seen. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "This isn't a decision to make hastily." Caleb nodded, respecting her need for time. "Of course. Whatever you decide, I won't regret asking." The next day, they continued their journey, the terrain gradually becoming less steep as they descended toward the plains where Fort Benton lay. Sophia grew quieter the closer they got to civilization, the tension evident in the set of her shoulders and the tightness around her eyes. By late afternoon, they could see the town in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys, the Missouri River a dark line beyond the buildings. "We'll be there within the hour," Caleb observed, watching Sophia's reaction carefully. She nodded, her expression closed. "I'll leave you at the outskirts. No need for me to go into town." "Sophia, it's better this way," she interrupted. "You deliver your prisoner, collect your bounty. I'll wait for you at the cabin, if you still want to return." Before Caleb could respond, Wiley let out a harsh laugh. "Ain't that touching?" he sneered. "The bounty hunter and the mountain witch playing house. Wonder what the good folks of Fort Benton would say if they knew Charlotte Larson was living up in those hills." Sophia went very still, her face draining of color. "What did you call me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Wiley's grin widened, sensing he had found a vulnerable spot. "Charlotte Larson, or did you think nobody would recognize you? Your husband might have been a bastard, but folks still think you murdered him in cold blood. There's still a reward for information about you, you know?" Caleb looked between them, confusion giving way to understanding. "Sophia. It's my middle name," she said tightly. "I stopped using Charlotte when I left." "Left with blood on your hands," Wiley taunted. "Slit his throat while he slept. That's what they say." "That's not how it happened," Sophia snapped, her composure cracking. "He was beating me, would have killed me if I hadn't defended myself." "Not what the witnesses said," Wiley continued, clearly enjoying her distress. "His friends saw him alive and well that evening, found him dead the next morning with you nowhere to be found." Open and shut case. Caleb moved his horse between them, cutting off Wiley's line of sight to Sophia. "That's enough," he said firmly. "One more word, and I'll gag you for the rest of the journey." He turned to Sophia, whose face had become an expressionless mask. "It doesn't change anything," he said quietly. "I believe you." She met his gaze, searching his face for any sign of doubt. Finding none, she gave a slight nod. "I'll meet you at the eastern crossroads after sundown," she said, her voice steady once more. "Be careful in town. Wiley might not be the only one with loose lips." With that, she turned her horse and rode toward a stand of trees that would keep her hidden from view of the town, leaving Caleb to continue with his prisoner. The remaining ride to Fort Benton seemed longer than it should have, Caleb's thoughts churning with this new information. He believed Sophia's version of events without question. Everything he had learned about her character over the past weeks confirmed it. But the existence of suspicion, possibly even a warrant, complicated matters. At the sheriff's office, Deputy Marshal Thomas Blackwell received Wiley with evident satisfaction, examining the recovered money and completing the necessary paperwork for Caleb's bounty. "Fine work tracking him through this winter weather, Hawkins," Blackwell commented as he counted out the reward money. "Most bounty hunters would have waited for spring." "Got lucky," Caleb replied noncommittally, not wanting to mention Sophia's involvement. As Blackwell locked Wiley in a cell, the outlaw called out, "Hey, Marshal, you might be interested to know who helped Hawkins here catch me. Charlotte Larson, the woman wanted for killing her husband over in Helena 5 years back." Blackwell paused, turning to look at Caleb with raised eyebrows. "That true? You found Charlotte Larson?" Caleb kept his expression neutral, Don't know what he's talking about. Tracked Wiley on my own, as I've been doing for years. He's lying, Wiley shouted from his cell. She's living up in the mountains, calling herself Sophia now. Helped him find me. They're thick as thieves. Condemned men say all sorts of things, Caleb remarked calmly to Blackwell. Is there actually a warrant for this Charlotte person? Blackwell scratched his chin. Was years ago. Case has gone cold since most figured she died in the mountains that winter. Husband was Samuel Fenton, nasty piece of work by all accounts. Beat his first wife to death, though it was never proven. Sounds like whoever killed him did the world a favor, Caleb observed. Maybe so, Blackwell agreed. But the law's the law. If she's alive, there are still questions to answer. He studied Caleb's face. You sure you don't know anything about this? Positive, Caleb replied evenly. Now, if we're finished here, I'd like to get supplies and head back out. Don't care for town life much these days. Blackwell seemed to accept this, completing the transaction and bidding Caleb good day. As Caleb left the office, he could hear Wiley still shouting accusations, but the marshal appeared to be ignoring him. Caleb moved quickly through town, purchasing supplies and asking careful questions about Samuel Fenton and the incident 5 years earlier. The story he pieced together confirmed what he had already suspected. Fenton had been widely disliked, known for his violent temper and drinking. While some believed his wife had murdered him, others suspected he had simply received his due from someone he had wronged. Most importantly, Caleb learned that the case had indeed gone cold, with no active pursuit of Charlotte Larson in years. The original warrant remained technically valid but was not a priority for any law enforcement. As darkness fell, Caleb rode to the eastern crossroads as agreed, his saddlebags heavy with supplies and his mind made up about what he wanted to say to Sophia. He found her waiting in the shadow of a large cottonwood tree, her horse ground tied nearby. You came, she said simply as he approached. Did you doubt I would? Caleb dismounted, standing before her. I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd decided it was simpler to just move on. Her voice was carefully neutral. Now that you know the truth. I already knew the truth, Caleb replied. The important parts, anyway. You defended yourself against a man who was trying to kill you. The rest is just details. Sophia studied his face in the dim light. It's not that simple, Caleb. There's still a warrant. Still people who believe I'm a murderer. The warrant's practically forgotten. Caleb told her what he had learned in town. And as for what people believe, well, the only belief that matters to me is what I know about you. He took a step closer. I told you I wanted to stay, Sophia. That hasn't changed. If anything, knowing more about what you've overcome only makes me more certain. Sophia looked away, emotion flickering across her face. I've been alone so long, she said quietly. Built walls to protect myself. Forgot what it was like to trust, to feel. She trailed off, then looked back at him. But these past weeks with you, I've remembered things I thought were lost to me forever. Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he took her hand in his. I'm not asking for promises, he said. Just a chance to see where this leads. One day at a time. The moonlight caught the shimmer of tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady when she spoke. One day at a time, she agreed, squeezing his hand. Starting now. They rode back to her mountain cabin together, arriving after midnight to find everything as they had left it. The animals healthy in their shelters, the cabin secure against the elements. As they settled in, the familiar surroundings now charged with new meaning. Caleb realized that for the first time in years, he was looking forward rather than backward, thinking of possibilities rather than regrets. The winter passed in a rhythm they created together. Caleb learned more of Sophia's survival skills, becoming adept at moving through the snow-covered landscape, tracking game, reading weather patterns. In return, he helped improve the cabin, adding a larger corral for the horses, reinforcing the roof against heavy snows, crafting furniture that made the small space more comfortable. They learned each other's habits, preferences, and histories. Sophia spoke more freely of her past, sharing both the joyful memories of her childhood and the darker times that had led her to the mountains. Caleb told her of his war experiences, the nightmares that still occasionally plagued him, the wanderlust that had driven him for so long. Gradually, the careful space they had maintained between them diminished. The first time Caleb kissed Sophia was on a clear February evening, standing outside the cabin after checking the traplines. The stars blazed overhead in the black sky, their breath-forming clouds in the frigid air, and when he leaned toward her questioningly, she met him halfway. That night, they shared the bed not for practicality or warmth, but because neither wanted to be apart from the other. Their lovemaking was tentative at first, then increasingly confident as they discovered each other's desires. Afterward, lying with Sophia's head on his chest, Caleb felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, that he had never experienced before. "I love you," he said simply, the words feeling natural and necessary. Sophia raised herself on one elbow to look at him, her eyes searching his face in the dim light. "I love you too," she replied softly. "I think I have for longer than I was willing to admit." As winter gave way to spring, they discussed their future. Sophia's initial resistance to leaving the mountains had softened somewhat, though she remained wary of town life. "We don't have to live in town," Caleb assured her as they planted the garden in April. "But maybe somewhere less remote, where we could have a small ranch, raise horses perhaps. And if someone recognizes me?" The concern remained, though she spoke of it less frequently now. "Then we face it together," Caleb said firmly. "The truth is on our side, Sophia." Fenton's reputation was well known. If it ever came to a trial, plenty would speak to his character and what you endured. She considered this, pushing her hands into the fresh-turned earth. "I've been running for so long," she admitted. "The thought of stopping, of facing it, it's frightening." "I know." Caleb knelt beside her, covering her soil-stained hand with his. "But you're not alone anymore." By early summer, they had made their decision. They would leave the mountain cabin when fall came, traveling to a small valley Caleb knew of near the Wyoming border, where land was available and questions few. There, they would build a new life together, not entirely in the wilderness but not in the crush of civilization either. Before they left, however, Sophia insisted on one important step. "I want to be married properly," she told Caleb one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset. "With my real name, all of it, so there's no shadow over us." Caleb understood what this meant. Using her full name, Charlotte Sophia Larson, would be a statement that she was no longer hiding, no longer running from her past. "Are you sure?" he asked, knowing the risk it represented. "Yes," she said with quiet certainty. "I want to start our new life honestly." In late August, they rode into Fort Benton together, Sophia holding her head high despite her evident tension. They went directly to Deputy Marshal Blackwell's office, where Caleb had insisted they begin. Blackwell looked up in surprise when they entered, recognition dawning as he studied Sophia's face. "Charlotte Larson," he said, not as a question but a statement. "Charlotte Sophia Larson," she corrected, her voice steady despite her white-knuckled grip on Caleb's hand. "I believe there are matters we need to discuss." To their surprise, Blackwell nodded thoughtfully, then opened a drawer and removed a folder. "Interesting timing, Miss Larson. Just received word from Helena last week about your case." He pushed a document across the desk. "Samuel Fenton's brother finally admitted what many suspected, that Samuel attacked you that night with intent to kill, and you acted in self-defense." Sophia stared at the paper, disbelief evident in her expression. Why would he come forward now after all these years? she asked. Conscience, perhaps, Blackwell suggested. Or maybe he's dying and wants to clear the ledger. Either way, the warrant has been formally withdrawn. He smiled slightly. You're a free woman, Miss Larson. The relief that flooded through Sophia was visible, her shoulders dropping as years of tension released. Caleb put his arm around her, supporting her as the news sank in. Thank you for telling us, he said to Blackwell. This means more than you can know. Blackwell nodded. Figured it might. Now, was there something else bringing you to town? Don't imagine you came just on the off chance I had good news. Sophia found her voice again. We came to be married, she said, and to face whatever consequences might come from my past. Now it seems we can simply focus on the marriage. Blackwell smiled more broadly. Judge Wilson can help you with that. He's at the courthouse today. He stood, offering his hand first to Caleb, then to Sophia. Congratulations to you both. They were married that afternoon in the small Fort Benton courthouse, with Judge Wilson officiating and 2 court clerks serving as witnesses. Sophia wore a simple blue dress she had purchased that morning, and Caleb his cleanest shirt and vest. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed Sophia with all the love and promise he felt for their future together. Her eyes, when they parted, shone with happiness unmarred for the first time by fear or doubt. They spent a week in Fort Benton, staying at the River Hotel, gradually becoming more comfortable with town life again. Sophia visited the mercantile, the dressmaker, even attended Sunday services at the small church. No one questioned her identity or raised concerns about her past. When they left for their new home near the Wyoming border, they did so not as fugitives but as husband and wife, looking forward rather than over their shoulders. The small ranch they established thrived under their combined skills. Caleb's knowledge of horses and Sophia's expertise in living off the land made them largely self-sufficient. They built a comfortable cabin, larger than Sophia's mountain home but still simple and practical. In their second year there, Sophia gave birth to a son they named William Thomas Hawkins, after both their fathers. A daughter, Emma Grace, followed 2 years later. Occasionally, Caleb would take on tracking work for the local sheriff, but never bounties that would take him far from home. Sophia taught both their children her survival skills, ensuring they could navigate the wilderness with confidence, while also encouraging their education with books ordered from as far away as Denver. On cold winter evenings, they would sometimes tell their children the story of how they met of a lone woman in the mountains and the bounty hunter who found her, of how she taught him to survive the wilderness while he helped her learn to trust again. And that's why we never turn strangers away, Sophia would explain, looking at Caleb with eyes that still held the same love they had discovered in that mountain cabin years before. Because sometimes, the person you least expect can become the one you can't imagine living without. As their family grew and their ranch prospered, Caleb and Sophia Hawkins became respected figures in their small community. Few knew the details of their past, and those who did kept the knowledge to themselves, recognizing that some stories belonged only to those who had lived them. The mountain cabin remained theirs, a retreat they visited in summer months and a legacy they promised to their children. In this way, Sophia kept her connection to the wilderness that had saved her, even as she embraced the life and love she had found with Caleb. Years passed, children grew, and the West gradually became less wild. But in their home at the edge of civilization, Caleb and Sophia Hawkins maintained the balance they had forged together between wilderness and settlement, independence and connection, the strength to survive alone and the courage to live together. And on quiet nights, when the children were asleep and the house was still, they would sometimes sit on their porch, looking up at the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting. In those moments, Caleb would take Sophia's hand, still strong and capable after all their years together, and they would share a smile that spoke of mountains conquered, trust earned, and a love that had survived against all odds.